Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Channel 6 TV Community Focus. I'm Kenny Fogle. Glad you could be with us tonight. And we are doing our series on veterans and people from Nelson County. And we'd like to certainly welcome you to join and listen in. So appreciate you tuning in tonight. And I got a special guest with me now, Mr. Ray Ice. And Ray Ice here is served, I still call him General Ice, as to me, once you make General, I think the rule is you're always General. So first of all, General, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you being here. And well, first of all, I know you've been retired for a few years, so the military is not your day-to-day job or of any sort anymore.
Not anymore.
Okay, but at one point in your life, I mean, growing up, you grew up on a farm here in Nelson County.
I did.
What changed the farmer to the soldier?
Well, combination of things. Obviously, during that time frame that I was growing up, and in 19, 20 years old, the draft was still the draft. There were no numbers and so forth. And along about when I was 19, the local guys were trying to get me to join the National Guard here. Mm-hmm. I felt like it'd be 3 or 4 years before I would be involved, because the draft age then became, 22, 23. And then John Kennedy signed the executive order that if you were married, you were draft exempt. So the draft age dropped down very quickly, about 2 to 3 years.
Well, you could have got married real quickly.
It wasn't possible, but not practical. Yeah. So anyway, I joined the National Guard here, like a lot of other folks, to avoid the draft, with not any thought of what might happen on down the road. Yeah. So, I went away to basic training like everybody else did, and working in my full-time job at the time, working for GE. And that's kind of how I got started in the military. Mm-hmm.
National Guard back then, as compared to the National Guard in later years, tell me a little bit about the first years of the National Guard when you first got in. Was it what you expected it to be? Was it what was the transformation from the National Guard? Because you hear the complaints all the time. People say, weekend warriors. They didn't do much. They were just sort of in soldiers in name only. How true was any of that?
Some of it was true, probably overdone. When I first got in, we were meeting one night a week, on Monday night, as a matter of fact. And I guess that went on up until, well, I'm not certain when it did the weekend, but probably that transition, part of the reason it got the name that it got is the National Guard at that time, the equipment they had were kind of a fall off from the active forces, certainly the Army side of it. As an example, in this state at the time, we had 4 artillery battalions, and none of them had enough equipment to do any significant training that was required. So my recall of the transition would have been about 1967. And that's where, I guess, Vietnam was such that there were some criticisms about the draft being the source of replacements, with all the people who were in the National Guard not getting called up. So they came up with this, they called it SRS, and it was a program whereby they wanted key units to be well-trained, ready to go to war. So our unit here in Bardstown was one of those that's selected for the SRF program, and what that entailed was we took equipment from the other battalions to fill us up, not only 100% competent equipment, but where we were short on personnel, some of those people came to our unit. So we were training, in some cases, 2 weekends a month. And I can recall being at Fort Knox in February shooting artillery. You're not an artilleryman, but pulling those old 155 towed howitzer around with a 10-ton truck presented its set of problems in the mud. So we spent a lot of time retrieving vehicles out of the mud. So that culminated, my recall was in '67, we did annual training down at Fort Campbell. At that time, the 101st were deployed to Vietnam, and the evaluator that we had on the briefing was a full colonel, the Vardy commander, and I can almost see him today. It was back when they had the starch uniforms, and you could almost cut your finger on the seam. And he stood up and being very complimentary of our performance at annual training. And he made a statement, he would just love to have us supporting his 101st units in Vietnam. And little did we know, at the time the planning was already in place to have the unit activated. And so along about April of 1968 was when the announcement that we had been called up.
Yeah.
And so after we got through that shock, I think we were here some 30 days. We loaded equipment on flat cars at Fort Knox, everything that the battalion had, and shipped it to Fort Hood, Texas. That was our pre-deployment site. And so, interesting enough, all the equipment we had, which was the old towed howitzers and the old M1 and M14 rifles, they took all that away from us and gave us brand new M109 howitzers, the M16s, and the full complement of what was first-class equipment at that point. So we trained for approximately 6 months there at Fort Hood before the deployment. So back to your original question, I had very little time in the Guard that was what you described as not very effective Guard. Now, there were units and continue to be units for a while, but I think that was probably the period whereby the recognition that we have some forces out there that we as a country need to do a better job of equipment and training and be ready.
Well, the reason I ask that question is I'm very sensitive to that criticism, because I know that people will say, well, the National Guard is not on the equivalent of active duty. Well, the National Guard in many ways was active duty, and in some ways, I'm not going to say superior because I don't want to complain about the active duty people. But the fact that you were doing your job as well as you did was probably led to the fact that you ended up in Vietnam.
Well, there's no doubt. The rating system is what they, I guess, used to determine what units were. Now, as it turned out, there were only 2 battalions of artillery that were activated and sent to Vietnam. Ours was one of them. The other one was from the unit in New Hampshire. And I still have documentation from some of the supported forces over there, 3-star, that was so complimentary that he wrote a letter to the battalion commander, very complimentary of our battalion and its performance in Vietnam. I mean, we had the self-confidence, we had the ability to compete with the forces anywhere.
Well, one of the things I've noticed about the National Guard, serving in both National Guard and active duty, is a National Guard, obviously you know each other. You train together, know each other, you know each other, you've seen each other out at the grocery and everything. It's more of a teamwork than when you get in active duty, you've got people coming in from everywhere. And I'm not saying they don't trust each other, but it's that family feeling with National Guard had to play some role.
Well, I've said before, in fact, I've said it to these guys and people that I had interaction with since Vietnam, that unit, the group of men, and I say men because at that time women were not in the Guard, were the best unit that I have ever seen and worked with. And I had the good fortune of having some super people in my unit that I would put up against any force, anywhere.
Now, what role were you playing at that time when you first went to Vietnam?
Well, I was a second lieutenant when we got activated. And so, crazily enough, the National Guard and the active component has 2 different systems for promotion. So I kind of was disadvantaged in that on active duty at that time, from the time you get out of OCS, get commissioned, to get promoted to first lieutenant was 1 year. In the Guard, it was 36 months. I had 21 months in grade, and effectively my data rank started the day we were activated. So we had some people who just came out of OCS, and so even though they worked for me, they basically outranked me. And so I had to serve a full year on active duty before I could get promoted to first lieutenant, which is the rank, excuse me, the rank that I had when I return from Vietnam. And then I had to come back into the National Guard system to get promoted to captain. So I was a lieutenant, first lieutenant, and second lieutenant during that period.
First lieutenant, obviously, you know, in some positions is starting out as an officer, but as a field in Vietnam, first lieutenant, in many cases, you were the commander on the field.
Yes, I always had a captain the period that I was in the field. I was the assistant battery commander, executive officer, if you will. So effectively, I was calling the shots, not in deference to the commander, but I was the person on the ground, you know, managing the artillery.
Right.
You know.
Well, tell me, what can you tell me about Vietnam? I mean, obviously, as a farm boy that's working at GE, and then one day you're here, and one day your feet are on the soil of Vietnam. I mean, that had to be a shock.
Well, it was a shock, and we all probably at some point, if you've ever been into a foreign country, there's some degree of apprehension, and certainly there was on my part and everybody else's part as to what to expect. The thing I will never forget is the smell that you get from the rice paddies when you land. And how in the world will I ever get used to this? And it doesn't go away. But that experience was one I learned a lot. I've used the term, I wouldn't take $1 million for it, but I wouldn't go back for $5 million. So I was blessed with a good group of people. I was with the unit the entire period of time, which is because the infusion program, many of the people were not with this unit the entire period of time.
So, when you went to Vietnam and came, were you a changed person when you got back? I mean, what affected you in any way?
Anybody who says they're not changed in some way with combat experience is probably not honest with themselves. If you ask me to define how I was changed, I'm not going to tell you it affected me as I know some other people it affected me.
Yeah.
I felt good about what we did, what we accomplished. Still feel good about it. I was probably more mature. I had some responsible positions of which, and responsibilities there, which kind of tested me. And to know that I came through those was a nice feeling.
I'd say people recognized a different person when you got back as probably, I'm not going to say more mature, more something, but the thing I've seen in most combat veterans is they've aged considerably, and not aged physically, aged mentally.
That is very, very correct. Very correct.
So again, coming in Vietnam again was an experience that I guess I don't want to say define your life, but it'd probably be something that the rest of your life will always be indelibly in part of you because.
Well, no doubt. No doubt. However, since I continued to stay in the military, and I had responsibilities, command responsibilities up the chain, the one that probably had as much influence as any, this is not one that we recognize. I had the good fortune of commanding the 138th Field Artillery Brigade. And at that time, we still had the wall in Germany and the Soviet forces the other way. I had a number of occasions to visit that wall. And in fact, as I was commanding, the brigade was the highest priority reserve unit to be activated in the event that the Soviets decided to come our way. And so I had 3 active duty battalions at Fort Sill that would become part of my organization, including the 2 here in Kentucky, on the day that the whistle blew for us to become active component. And so we did a tremendous amount of training and coordinating to the point I've had a number of instances, good fortune, to be on the ground with the commander that I would be supporting there in Germany in the event that we were activated. To the point one afternoon, this colonel told me, he said, you know, you have to realize that if you come, you need to know this battleground. So he gave me a Black Hawk helicopter and 2 pilots to fly the DMZ and learn the battle plan for that evening, which was just a tremendous experience. So when Waldo went down, if you can recall them chipping away at the wall, I don't think I went to bed about 1:30 or 2 o'clock that morning, because it was just that kind of a change in the life and what we had trained to do. I actually had our equipment pre-positioned in Germany, which most people didn't realize that at the time.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the Cold War, I think it'd give a lot of people, as a kid, obviously we were going, ducking under desks and all kinds of things. We had all these drills, but it's a different feeling when you're right over there next to it, because I remember going to Germany. It was mere years and years later after all this, and just walking on German soil, just something about things gave me an eerie feeling, just knowing what went on there 30, 40 years earlier.
Well, I just had an opportunity to go to Poland this past summer for a week, and the first time I'd been behind what used to be the Iron Curtain.
Yeah.
I was absolutely amazed at the progress they have made compared to what I expected. So anyway, Vietnam was, a big part of my military.
Well, getting back from Vietnam, as I said, a changed person, changed officer. I'm sure that had led a lot to your philosophy on when you become commander later on. I mean, as you moved up the ranks to general, I'm sure that had some parts of that reflected in that years later on decisions you made, or the way you treated troops or anything of that nature.
Absolutely, and training methods and the intensity, being poorly planning, poorly trained. To give an example, at one time I was speaking in front of an ROTC group up in Northern Kentucky University. And one of the points I made with these young kids that were about to pin on the bar is, if you aren't willing to spend your time making absolutely sure that the troops that you have responsibility for are trained, then you should not pin on that bar. And I said, the last thing you ever want to do is write home a letter to a wife, a parent, whoever the next of kin is, and say, Johnny got killed because I didn't do my job thoroughly. And if you're not willing to do that, instead of accepting that bar when you're ready to put it on, don't take it. And that's kind of the way that I expected my commanders to train, and that's what I used to measure is, you don't know when you're in the National Guard or Reserve that tomorrow is not the day that you get called. And there was a period when they used the term "come as you are," which means training, you're ready to go. So that was a driver behind my philosophy of how you train. You train for war just like it was tomorrow.
So basically, as you're moving up the ranks, the National Guard, and I guess the reason one of the questions, going back to my original question, I think people are taking it a whole lot more seriously now. It's a serious business, like you said. One day you may be in the National Guard here, and the next day there may be a call, like 9/11. When 9/11 hit, it was an almost instantaneous call up for a lot of people.
Right.
One day they're going to work at a different job, the next day they're called up in active duty military.
Well, the other piece I think is enhanced that there's more opportunities for the National Guardmen to be on active duty for a short period of time, integrating with the active component. And there's been more of acceptance of the active component in the Guard. It's a one Army, and I speak Army because I'm more familiar with that. But I'm certain the same thing was with the Air Force, because I know the Air Force deploys far more even than the Army does.
And total force was our big thing.
They call it one Army. Now it's total force because obviously the military depends on the Air Force and for air assets, and not so much Navy, but again, the total force is a recognized term.
You've been out a while, but you're still general, still a veteran, and I know you're still interested in veterans.
Absolutely.
And that's because I know I see you every year at the Memorial Day ceremony, and that's something that's still near and dear to you, obviously.
Obviously it is, and I try to do, if I find somebody that it's obvious that they don't know about the veterans benefits.
Mm-hmm.
I try to do everything I can to help get them the benefits that they deserve and have earned, if you will.
Well, I want to get you into anything, in your opinion on anything, but the youth of the day. I mean, I don't know, is the military something you recommend for somebody to consider if they're looking for a career or looking for guidance in their life?
There are some individuals who could help themselves in the military.
Mm-hmm.
The problem, I think, as a society, we hear about those people who are the bad actors.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of good people out there, good, solid people.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, you don't hear as much about them. The military not only offers what we commonly think about discipline, but it has a very nice career for some of the folks who might choose that. And we happen to think that 20 years seems like indefinite. When you're 21 years old,
Yeah.
that is a long period. But guess what? If we live long enough, we're going to get there. And so those retirement benefits are just outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
And for that young person who wants to go in the military and continues to strive, they can achieve the rank in a relatively short order. So I do recommend it to some people, not all people. I think obviously we have people that ought to go to college. That doesn't prohibit them from going through ROTC programs, or even what's so little known are the service schools and what they have to offer. It's just, they're all tremendous programs, and I don't know that we do enough to communicate with these young folks of really what's available.
Mm-hmm. You made a lot of bonds back in the old days, I guess you would call them, as military days. I still see a lot of those people even today.
I do, yes, I do.
Bring back memories when you see when that,
Well,
or is it just, are you just seeing an old friend?
Some of both, in most cases, specifically if it were some of the folks who were associated with Vietnam, almost invariably that subject comes up.
Yeah.
But otherwise, there are a lot of other things to talk about and interact with.
Found most Vietnam veterans don't want to talk Vietnam very much, except with somebody they shared it with, and I've seen that over and over. With it's not a subject you talk about with family or friends.
It really isn't.
But when you run into somebody you bonded with, it's a
Right. I obviously being retired, I've had an opportunity to do a lot of traveling, and you see these guys with retired military hat on. Some cases it says Vietnam. And I typically ask them, where were you and what year?
Mm-hmm.
Which starts a conversation, and it's amazing.
yeah.
Sometimes you run into people who were at the same area at the same time that we were. So it's kind of interesting.
So retirement now and everything, life is going good for you. So
Yeah, it's good health and just enjoying life.
well, good. Well, I see you walking around town a lot, so I know you're out enjoying that.
I
So
try to stay healthy. I think that has as much to do with exercise and diet as anything, and enhancing one's life. So.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come in here. I know, like I said, even retired folks, and I found this, they stay pretty busy because I rarely run into a retired person who says I'm doing absolutely nothing.
That is very true.
So I do appreciate you taking the time to come in here today. And again, one of the things we want to do here is we want people to remember. And I say that in a way that people are, if you haven't been involved with the military, and it's coming less and less that you don't have a military member in your family or somebody you know. This country was built on several things, and one of the things is people living and dying or going to war, and it's not a pleasant subject, but somebody had to do it.
As long as we have a world where there are people that want to kill us, maybe it's not the term they use, but we don't have a choice except to have a military to defend this country. And so the stronger our military, the less chance we have of actually getting into war.
Yeah.
So I'm a big proponent of all the dollars that we spend in the military. Could it be better spent? Sure. But I'm too old to do it, but I don't want to ever take a group of people to war that I don't have the best equipment that man knows.
Yeah.
And I really don't care what it costs. You evaluate that against a life. And so I'm a proponent of keeping our force strong and supported. So anyway. I keep doing that.
That's America. Well, General, appreciate you being here.
Thank
General Ray Ice here with us from Nelson County, served with the local National Guard. We'll say Air National Guard because it rolls off of my tongue so easy. Army National Guard here, and appreciate you stopping by here today and continue doing what it is you're doing.
Thank you.
All right, stick around. A lot more to come here on Channel 6 TV. We'll be right back.